Welcome to Fletcher United Methodist Church Memorial Garden. My name is Rus Clemmer and I'll be your tour guide as we go through the garden. But first, let me tell you a few things about the garden. The garden is approximately 2 years old. It doesn't seem very old, but the original garden was where our new sanctuary actually is today. It contains flowers and plants from the old memorial garden, such as the roses, the irises, the hostas, and the nandinjas over here that border the garden and are inside of the garden. To that, we have added other flowers that are of a biblical nature. Either they were mentioned in the Bible in those biblical times, or they are plants that have been named after characters or events in the Bible. They have been arranged so that they will actually form storylines for each and every one of us to come and enjoy. Also, you will notice the walkway. The walkway itself, where the red bricks are, we are now replacing the walkway with memorial and honor bricks for members of our congregation. So please come and enjoy our garden. We'll move forward to the first brick and I'll explain how the bricks actually work that are located in the gardens next to the plants. The bricks that are in the garden that are at each one of the features and each one of the plants will name what the plants are, give an outline of what the storyline is, and give the book, the chapter, and the verses where the story can be found in your Bible. So you may study the Bible easily by referring to each one of the stones. We'll start here with Jacob. Jacob was the grandson of Abraham and the son of Isaac. Jacob has deceived his father and has taken the blessings that should have gone rightfully to his older twin brother, Esau. And he is now running. He is fearful of what his brother might do to him. He leaves, and at nightfall, he stops to rest before setting out the rest of the way to his uncle's where he is going. He lays down, he pulls a rock and puts it under his head. And he has a vision of a grand staircase that runs between the earth and heaven. He sees angels descending and ascending on that staircase. In the morning, when Jacob awakes, he builds an altar to God and starts to worship. And he makes a covenant with God that he will be faithful to God for the rest of his life if God will be with him throughout his life. The plant that is here is called Jacob's Ladder. It has been named after the story of Jacob's vision of the grand staircase. You will notice that it is green with white trim, and it's a very compact plant that sort of looks like something that would be easy to climb. But of course, it is just a small plant. Jacob goes on after praying and worshiping and completing his covenant with God to his uncle's house. While he's at his uncle's house, he meets a young girl called Rachel and falls in love with her. He goes to his uncle and he asks for Rachel's hand in marriage. And he will work for 7 years to gain Rachel's hand. Upon completion of the 7 years, when he goes to his uncle tells him that he cannot wed Rachel, that he must wed Leah, her older sister. He does, But then he bargains again with his uncle to gain the hand of Rachel and works another 7 years. Over here are 7 sages. Those represent the first 7 years that Jacob works for Rachel's hand, but marries Leah. To my right are 7 herbs, and those represent the additional years that he worked, 7 more years, to gain the hand of Rachel in marriage. Jacob returns back to the land of Canaan. He, at this time, now has 10 sons by his wife Leah and 2 sons by his wife Rachel. The oldest of those sons of Rachel's is called Joseph. So we'll talk about the story of Joseph. Joseph was favored by his father. So Jacob has a coat of many colors made for Joseph and presented it to him. All of his brothers were jealous of this great coat of many colors. This trellis with the rose, it's a climbing rose, and the rose is called Joseph's coat of many colors. The roses bloom from yellow through oranges to deep dark reds. So it is truly a magnificent rose to represent Joseph. Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers that in the dream he would be the leader, he would be the one that they would bow down to, his brothers hated him even more. So one day, while Joseph brought out food and water for lunch while they were tending the flocks in the field, the brothers grabbed him and threw him into a pit. A traveling caravan passed by and they sold Joseph to them. They, in turn, took him to Egypt. When the brothers went home, they told their father, Jacob, that he had been killed by wild animals, and his father grieved. The Pharaoh had a troubling dream, and then he had a second troubling dream, and he couldn't understand what it was all about. But one of his staff in his household said he knew of a man named Joseph who could interpret the dream. Joseph was brought before the Pharaoh, and Joseph listened to the Pharaoh's description, and he indicated that both dreams were of the same. It meant that there would be great and plenty and good crops for 7 years. And then 7 years of famine, a deep famine of drought and loss of crops. So the Pharaoh put Joseph over top of all the preparations for making and storing and growing the grain. We have planted wheat here in the field to represent some of the grain that Joseph grew and stored. Our next segment is with regards to Moses. Moses is a grown man. He is out in the desert and he sees a bush burning but not being consumed. The plant before me is called a burning bush. It's very green today, but this fall it will turn bright red. And that's why it is called a burning bush. The burning bush, once Moses approaches it, he realizes that the Lord is speaking to him. Moses, Moses. The Lord tells Moses that he is to lead his people, the Israelites, out of Egypt and back to the land of Canaan. Moses hesitates, but then agrees. And then the Lord lays out his plan. He is going to put plagues on the Egyptians to force them to release his people and allow them to leave. The 10th plague, the angel of death passing over the households. The instructions that the Lord gave was for lambs to be slaughtered. Hyssop, which is the plant below here, it looks like a bottle brush when it blooms and matures. And God wanted Moses to instruct the people to take bunches of hyssop, dip into the lamb's blood, and to spread the lamb's blood across the door frame of each household, so that the angel of death would pass over the Israelites and spare them, but only take the firstborn child of the Egyptians. Above the crossbar of our cross is a raised garden. It is in the shape of the Star of David. And so our story is about King David. The Israelites were at war. The older brothers were in the battles. Jesse sent his son David to the battlefield with food and nourishment for his brothers. David met with his brothers and gave them the food. Suddenly, a great giant, Goliath, came out on the enemy's side, shouted at them, swore at them, and threatened them, challenged them. David heard all of this and could not believe. David talked to his brothers, and they said, "Stay out of it." He gathered up stones and put in his pouch, and took his slingshot and went down to challenge Goliath. Goliath laughed, most heartily laughed. David raised the slingshot above his head and twirled it around and released, and the stone hit the giant between his eyes in the forehead, and the giant fell dead. That's just one of the stories of David. There are many more that's there. It was a number of years before David became king of Israel. But he ruled. He was a mighty warrior. He also is credited for writing many of the Psalms that are in the book of Psalms. And in those Psalms are many flowers. The lilies of the valley, the lily plant itself, irises that were growing in the area. He painted a beautiful picture in many of the Psalms. So that's why we have decorated the raised garden with the lilies and also with crocuses, lilies of the valley, and the irises. David's son, Solomon, became the next king of Israel. And Solomon, there are many stories about how wise and how much wisdom he had. in his ruling, he built the temple for the Lord's and allowed the people to come and to worship. He took the Star of David, which is a six-pointed star, and he encircled the star. And now we have a plant that is called Solomon's seal, placed in the wedges between the spikes of the star. This concludes the tour of the Old Testament side of our memorial garden. I hope that you enjoy this. Hope you will come and see the stories and live them through reading your Bible scriptures. Thank you and have a good day.